Chapter 16 of the Story of Ancient Irish Civilization. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kate McMahon. The Story of Ancient Irish Civilization by P.W. Joyce. Chapter 16. How the People Dressed. An oval face, broad above and narrow below, golden hair, fair skin, white, delicate, and well-formed hands with slender, tapering fingers, these were considered as marking the type of beauty and of high family descent. They were the marks of aristocracy. To these natural advantages the people added by the usual artificial means. Among the higher classes, the finger-nails were kept carefully cut and rounded. It was considered shameful for a man of position to have rough, unkempt nails. Crimson-coloured finger-nails were greatly admired, and ladies sometimes dyed them this colour. Deirdre, uttering a lament for the sons of Usna, says, quote, "I sleep no more, and I shall not crimson my nails. No joy shall ever again come upon my mind." End of quote. Ladies often dyed the eyebrows black with the juice of some sort of berry. We have already seen, page 54, that the Irish missionary monks sometimes painted or dyed their eyelids black. An entry in Cormac's glossary plainly indicates that the blush of the cheeks was sometimes heightened by a colouring matter obtained from the alder tree, and the sprigs and berries of the elder were applied to the same purpose. Among Greek and Roman ladies, the practice was very general of painting the cheeks, eyebrows, and other parts of the face. Both men and women wore their hair long, and commonly flowing down the back and shoulders. The hair was combed daily after a bath. The heroes of the Fena of Erin, before sitting down to their dinner after a hard day's hunting, always took a bath and carefully combed their long hair. Among the higher classes in the very early times, great care was bestowed upon the hair. Its regulation consisted quite in art, and it was dressed up in several ways. Very often the long hair of men, as well as of women, was elaborately curled. Conall Kernach's hair, as described in the story of Daderga, flowed down his back, and was done up in, quote, hooks and plaits and swordlets. End of quote. The accuracy of this and other similar descriptions is fully borne out by the most unquestionable authority of all, namely, the figures in the early illuminated manuscripts and on the shrines and high crosses of later ages. In nearly all the figures of the Book of Kells, for example, 7th or 8th century, the hair is combed and dressed with the utmost care, so beautifully adjusted indeed that it could have been done only by skilled professional hairdressers, and must have occupied much time. Whether in case of men or women, it hangs down both behind and at sides, and is commonly divided the whole way, as well as all over the head, into slender fillets or locks, which sometimes hang down to the eyes in front. I do not find mentioned anywhere that the Irish dyed their hair, as was the custom among the Greeks and Romans. The men were as particular about the beard as about the hair. The fashion of wearing the beard varied. Sometimes it was considered becoming to have it long and forked, and gradually narrowed down to 2 points below. Sometimes, as shown in many ancient figures, it falls down in a single mass, while in a few it is cut straight across at the bottom, not unlike Assyrian beards. Nearly all have a moustache, in most cases curled up and pointed at the ends, as we often see now. In many the beard is carefully divided into slender twisted fillets, as described above, for the hair. Kings and chiefs had barbers in their service to attend to all this. Razors were used made of bronze as hard as steel, as we know by finding them mentioned in Irish documents as early as the 8th century, and many old bronze razors are now preserved in museums. From what precedes it will be understood that combs were in general use with men as well as with women, and many specimens of combs are now found in the remains of ancient dwellings. Bathing was very usual, at least among the upper classes, and baths and the use of baths are constantly mentioned in the old tales and other writings. In every public hostel, in every monastery, and in every high-class house there was a bath, with its accompaniments. Soap was used both in bathing and washing. Woolen and linen clothes formed the dress of the great mass of people. Both were produced at home, and in Chapter 19 the modes of manufacturing them will be mentioned. Silk and satin, which were of course imported, were much worn among the higher classes. The furs of animals, such as seals, otters, badgers, foxes, etc., were much used for capes and jackets, and for the edgings of various garments, so that skins of all the various kinds were valuable. They formed, too, an important item of everyday traffic, and they were also exported. The ancient Irish loved bright colours. In this respect they resembled many other nations of antiquity, as well, indeed, as of the present day, and they illustrated Ruskin's saying, quote, "Whenever men are noble they love bright colour, and bright colour is given them in sky, sea, flowers, and in living creatures." End of quote. The Irish love of colour expressed itself in all parts of their raiment, and we know that they well understood the art of dyeing. The several articles of dress on one person were usually coloured differently. Even the single outer cloak was often striped, spotted, or checkered in various colours. King Domnall in the 7th century on one occasion sent a many-coloured tunic to his foster son, Prince Congal, like Joseph's coat of many colours. A very common article of dress was a large cloak, generally without sleeves, varying in length but commonly covering the whole person from the shoulders down. The people also wore a tight-fitting coat with sleeves, something like our present-day frock-coat, but it was much shorter and without a collar, and it was kept tight by a belt around the waist. A short cape was often worn on the shoulders, sometimes carrying a hood to cover the head. The outer covering of the general run of the peasantry was just one loose-sleeved coat or mantle, generally of frieze, which covered them down to the ankles, and which they wore winter and summer. Women commonly wore a long loose cloak with a hood, a fashion which is common at the present day. The overgarments were fastened by brooches, pins, buttons, girdles, strings, and loops, many of them beautifully made and ornamented. The ancient Irish wore a trousers which was so tight-fitting as to show perfectly the shape of the limbs. When terminating below the ankles it was held down by a slender strap passing under the foot. Like other Irish garments, it was generally striped or speckled in various colours. Leggings of cloth or of thin, soft leather were used, and were laced on by strings tipped with white bronze, the metallic extremities falling down after the lacing so as to form pendant ornaments. A kilt was often worn, in which case the legs were left bare at the knees, with leggings below, for the kilt is of Irish origin, and was brought, like many other fashions, by the early colonists to Scotland, where it still held on, while it has long been disused in Ireland. Both men and women wore a garment of fine texture next to the skin, commonly made of wool or linen, but sometimes of silk or satin, embroidered with devices in gold or silver thread, worked with a needle. The men wore a hat of a conical shape without a leaf, but among the peasantry, men, in their daily lives, commonly went bareheaded, wearing the hair long behind so as to hang down on the back, and clipped short in the front. Married women usually had the head covered either with a hood, or with a long web of linen wreathed round and round in several folds. The veil was in constant use among the higher classes, and when not actually worn was usually carried, among other small articles, in a lady's ornamental hand-bag. Shoes were often made of untanned hide, stitched with thongs with several layers for a sole. But there was a more shapely shoe, made of fully tanned leather, having serviceable sole and heel, and often ornamented with patterns stamped in. The Irish were excessively fond of personal ornaments, which among the higher classes were made of expensive materials, such as gold, silver, gems, white bronze, etc. They wore rings and bracelets of various shapes on the fingers, including the thumb, round the wrist and forearm, and even round the leg above the ankle. Necklaces were very common, from the cheapest kind up to those with studs made of gold, pearls, and other gems, all of which materials were found native. They had torques for the neck, made of twisted gold bars, and the elaborate and immensely expensive crescents or gorgets have already been described, page 96. There was a gold ornament, a kind of open ring with bosses or buttons on the ends, called a bonnet du hat, worn on the breast, suspended from an ornamented button. Thin circular gold plates were also worn fastened on the breast, and as for brooches they were of all shapes and sizes, some plain, simple, and cheap, some of gold or other expensive material, of elaborate workmanship. Pictures and full descriptions of all these ornaments will be found in either of the two social histories. End of chapter 16.